Hello, and welcome to this, my fourth podcast about the built environment and my manifesto for change. My name's Terry Watts, and thank you for joining me again. Hopefully you've seen the other three as well. If not, you can go back and watch them. And we've covered the built environment itself, what it is and why it's so important, the steps for change that I think we need to see in the built environment. We've talked about the image, and now we're going to talk about the culture of the built environment. So you see where culture fits in the manifesto. And it's one of the more difficult ones to talk about because it is relatively intangible. And it's very difficult to change. It's one of those things that it reflects the society you live in, it reflects history, projects, and the backgrounds of the people involved. So it's a really difficult thing to get your arms around. So it's a difficult thing for an industry, a sector that's used to building and working with very tangible things to get its head around culture, I believe. And we'll see what you think about that when I've expanded some of the things that I'm hoping to talk about. The good thing from my perspective, though, is that the sector is made up of people who are brilliant at solving problems. On site, you go every day and you see people who are making what seems an impossible solution come out of something and making problems disappear and getting over something that the architect may not have thought about, or we've come across something in the ground which means we can't do what we plan to do, or there's an access problem, or this material doesn't work with that one, or there's something in short supply, or someone hasn't turned up. All those problems get solved and things get delivered. So I believe that we really can, once we get our heads around the idea of culture, we can start to actually look at how we can change the culture of working in the built environment. And for me, it manifests itself in three strands, really. There's the individual culture, what the person thinks about what they do and their position within the organization or the team or the work, wherever they happen to be. And the key thing I think we need to focus on there is reintroducing a pride in what we do. There was a program on the TV, I think it's Channel 5, about nightmare new builds at one stage. And I remember seeing how some plumbers had fitted bathroom suites into brand new houses. And someone had left all his rubbish and a cup of coffee, half-drunk cup of coffee, under the bath when he'd finished the installation. It looked great, but you knew that some stage, 5 years later, sometime they want to change the bathroom or mend a leak or do some decorating or change the panel on the side, someone would find a half empty cup of coffee that's moldy and horrible. And that's just not the pride that we need to see in the work, the built environment. No one goes to work, I believe, to do a bad job, and we need to reintroduce the idea, or make sure everybody in the places we work feels that their contribution and the pride they have in their work is absolutely part of the delivering the best quality product we can, and that's down to the culture. There's how we treat each other. It's respect for the individual. I used to call it back in the days at IBM, but it's understanding other people's perspectives, giving them the benefit of the doubt, be tolerant of different views, different approaches, different ways of doing things, and accepting those differences on face value, not trying to judge anybody, just getting on as a team and being part of much more of a tolerant, respectful environment. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, the managerial culture, really. So much of what I see and have seen in the built environment is still macho, top-down management. And someone talked to me once about how he felt that a company works is that the construction director shouts at the regional directors, who shout at the site supervisors or site project managers, who shout at the tradespeople, who shout at the individual labourers underneath. So it's kind of an aggressive, top-down, macho style of management, without people only knowing what they need to know, not having a feeling that they're part of a bigger team. And that's just not the culture that we need in the future going forward. We need to try and change that, both to make it more acceptable, but also make it more efficient and more effective in the 21st century. Because culture is everywhere, it affects everything, every aspect of the business. It oils the processes in business, and it's set by the top. It's not something you just do. It's not a project you ever finish. It's the way you behave. It's an active pursuit that you walk and talk every day. And it has to start with the management team from the top. They're the ones who drive the way the business works. And in doing their own bit and behaving in the way they want to do, they need others to behave, and setting the culture, they will precipitate a peer-to-peer culture which is respectful and accepting of others, and more collaborative and cooperative. Equally, that will feed down to individuals. If you're part of a team, you don't want to let the team down, and any pride that isn't there in the workplace will be replaced. But it's so important to get that from the top, and it's got to be a consistent measurement there, because so many of the people who are the individuals inside a built environment project are subcontractors. So the management responsible for delivery don't have the line responsibility for the individuals under them. So they've got to reinforce the culture even more strongly. And the business model, therefore, needs to be different in that it needs to reflect the culture. It's no point in having, and this does happen a lot in the built environment. You've got some big companies in the sector who do brilliant things, work brilliantly, and have all the right cultural aspects in their organizations, but they subcontract to subcontractors who subcontract again, by which time the changes they want to see, the way they want to work, the respect they want to engender doesn't get down the supply chain. That is something else we need to talk about in terms of engagement and leadership in the sector, which I come on to next week. And it also affects the image. People see from the outside what's left. If the person who took off the side of that bath I talked about 5 years after buying their new home and seeing a cup of coffee that's been left there with some rubbish and stuff, will know that that person didn't have respect for them as a customer. And that gives the image of the sector. That's the sort of thing we need to try and stop happening, so that people outside who interface with our sector on an infrequent basis in terms of the people and the work that we do, they need to recognize that actually it's been built by people who have a pride in what they do and who respect them as clients or as people who are going to use the built environment, and each other as well. So it's really important that we do that. It's a very difficult subject to get across, and I'm trying to keep this little podcast short. But if you wanted to find out more about it, I think this book, The Leadership Lab by Chris Lewis and Pippa Mulgrim, is absolutely brilliant in defining where I think we are today, which is a much more top-down, macho environment where culture is being driven in a certain way, which is the way that it's always been, versus the way that it needs to be in the future. And they talk about 21st century leaders in there. So a good book to read in lockdown. And if you know of any other books that you think might be of interest to me, I'd be grateful to hear from them. Drop me a line. I'd be really keen to hear what else you guys are reading and see if there's anything out there for me too. But the book does talk about the fact that changing culture isn't just about signing up to Mates in Mind or appointing our diversity officer or making sure there are female loos as well as men's loos within easy walking distance. All those things are really important to make sure that we have an environment which is attractive and welcoming to all. But the culture is about walking the talk. It's about being the changes we want to see. And it comes from leadership and management in the organization, behaving in the way we need it to behave and reflecting the culture we want all the way down the supply chain. And we'll talk about that again another time. So that's it today, relatively short. I hope you enjoyed that. There's so much to say around culture. As problem solvers, we solve all sorts of problems on site. Surely we can get our heads around and solve the problem of the culture of the built environment to make it much more effective in how it delivers, more attractive to those outside who we want to join, and more efficient as well. It makes our lives much more efficient and more effective, and stops driving the culture where there's a blame culture, which I believe leads to mental health and all sorts of pressures in the workplace that we don't need to tolerate anymore. So hopefully you've enjoyed that, and you'll join me next week for part 5 when we look at engagement. So see you then.